19. Laura managed to hide the flash of pure fury that shot through her. She was an expert at it. Not like the other two, saying exactly what they thought as soon as they thought it, letting every bubble of gas that got to the top of their brains just come blasting out of their mouths. They had no idea how hard she was working here. It had started with the socks. She had pointed out the completely obvious to Ivy that she needed a pair of socks, and Ivy had flat out said she'd ask for 3 pairs of socks. 1 for her that needed them, and 2 more to keep it even. Could anyone be as clueless as the pair of them? They had tights on and shoes, and she had bare legs and cardboard sandals she'd made herself. And they'd been happy enough for her to use her real sandals as a hammer and chisel to open up the drain. Of course she'd agreed, but she wasn't sure they had actually ever said thank you. About the socks, she had said nothing, and the anger passed eventually. It even helped. It tired her, and she slept better. Not that saying nothing was always a good idea. She was pretty sick of their silent moods, the pair of them. Ivy staring at her red, shiny ankles, Martine with her eyes closed. But if she asked them what they were thinking about, she knew what she'd hear from Ivy. I've never eaten much Japanese food, or any Japanese food, but I think a big bowl of clear chicken broth with some lime and some chilies would be lovely. Prawns floating in it, maybe. And sushi. It looks so pretty and so dainty. I think I'd like to try it. Not the raw stuff. And they make a salad with... what is it? Green papaya, said Martine. But that's Thai, and it's very sour. I'd like something very sour, Ivy said. Sour and clean on my palate. Even the apples are mushy now. They taste of nothing. And I never want to eat another piece of bread in my life. They don't eat bread in Japan, do they? Of course they eat bread in Japan. Laura couldn't help it sometimes. She wasn't a saint. They eat M&Ms and kettle chips and Burger King in Japan. We probably eat more sushi in Scotland than the Japanese now. Do you think they eat more haggis than us? Ivy said. She was too easy to wind up. There was no fun in it. Laura still tried, though. She did all the heavy lifting when it came to jokes and games and keeping up spirits. She even asked Martine about her bloody hotel room occasionally. What's the nicest hotel room you've ever been in, for real? She said. After a wedding, at a place at Fort William, Martine said. The telly was disguised as a mirror. A bit racy, but better than that ugly, big, black, flat screen staring back at you. In my dream hotel, the telly would come up out of a slot when you need it and then slide away again. Laura wanted to scream, will you have a crinoline lady over the toilet roll too? But instead she said, how about you, Ivy? What's your favourite hotel? Got anything to add to Martine's wish list? I've never stayed in a hotel, Ivy said. We always went to a caravan or a chalet when I was a wee girl. And bed and breakfasts don't count, do they? Laura caught Martine's eye. But haven't you ever travelled on business, she said, and stayed at a Best Western? Ivy shook her head. My clients were all in Fraserburgh, she said. I went on a training course to Glasgow once, but I stayed with my cousin. Her spare bedroom had a basin in it, mind you. But no hotels. Laura took 3 deep breaths in and out, feeling a hitch in her chest. That was unbearable, so selfish. She could at least have lied to them. She must have Googled the Ritz and Claridge's like everyone else. Well, when we get out and I go to my hotel, Martine said, you come with me and take first pick of the rooms. Speaking of which, Laura said, amazed by her own patience, not reacting to being left out of this plan, I do believe I hear room service." They all fell silent, listening to Kate's voice and the key in the outer door, the grating judder of the door on the stone as Gale wrenched it open. Then Kate was edging round the inner door with her carrier bag, relocking it behind her. She walked halfway over the floor and set the bag down, then walked backwards until she was pressed against the wall. She had one of her little cardigans on, and under it, one of her little blouses. Where did anyone even buy pencil skirts with kick pleats these days? Maybe she ran it up herself on a singer with a foot pedal. The silence stretched, all three of them staring at Kate, who stared back. Laura broke it, doing the work again, as usual. "What?" she demanded. "Are you waiting for one of us to look at what you've brought us and say thank you?" She pulled herself to her feet, not bothering to straighten all the way and risk making her back spasm. "It won't be you," Kate said. "What won't?" said Laura. "That she chooses. She's almost ready, you know." Laura reached and swept the bag up in one hand, then opened it. "Sandwiches," she said. "Apples, water. What a complete lack of surprise." Ivy and Martine had told her that one day before she arrived, there had been a banana and a pear, as if it was almost shopping day and supplies were running low. But it had been sandwiches, apples, and water every day she had been there. She could hardly blame Ivy for dreaming of sushi, really. "You're not thinking clearly," Kate said, upsetting me, annoying me. "After Gale chooses, I'll be tidying up. I'll be deciding what to do with the leftovers." Laura threw the bag down again. When someone came, when they were rescued and got out of this, she would take Ivy to Martine's hotel with the mirror tellies. It was probably Inverlochy Castle. And she would personally see to it that there was a Japanese option on the menu that night. She'd sleep with a chef if she had to. "I'll bear that in mind," she said to Kate. "Was there anything else you needed?" Kate's mouth was a white line, her cheeks two quivering pouches around it. "I'll enjoy it," she said, "clearing up after you." Neither of them even said thanks once Kate had left. Ivy had the nerve to criticise. "Do you think it's maybe not a good idea to antagonise her quite so much?" Laura's silent scream was long and, in her head, deafening. "Antagonise," she said, when it had finally dried up. "You're planning to tie her up, Ivy." "And soon, too," said Martine. "If Gale's nearly ready to choose, we need to act quickly." "Not really," Ivy said. "I don't care if it's Gale or Kate who comes in." "Gale's got a knife," Martine said. "Remember?" "I've got surprise and right on my side," said Ivy. "And something I don't want to tell you." "Hang on," Laura said. "Wait, what did you just say, Ivy? You don't care which one of them comes in first, and which one has to decide when to come in after her. Right," Ivy said. "I need to think this out," Laura said. "We've missed something." "Don't upset yourself," Martine said, and they shared a look then, the two of them. Had they been discussing her? She thought she had heard them whispering away when she was at the drain late last night, but she'd assumed they were trying to cover the sounds she was making, to spare her feelings, as if she cared. The painful, watery mess that fell out of her bowels wasn't what was worrying her. It was when she went for a pee that she could feel a little burst of panic. She knew she was getting cystitis. It was all she could do not to cry out with the pain of it when the flow started, and it was even worse when it stopped. Of course she was getting it. She had to be careful, especially on her period, not to drink too much wine and to bathe twice a day. And even then, at least twice a year, she asked her doctor for an antibiotic when the warm water and cranberry wouldn't shift it. She must have been mad to try to keep her water intake down, testing to find the bottom edge of the dose and see if she could get under it. Idiot. You okay? Ivy's voice floated over. She must have whimpered. Fine, Laura said. There was no point worrying them. Maybe if she drank her water ration in one go tomorrow, she could flush it through, even if she ended up off her gourd. And if she saved up her baby wipes till she'd stopped bleeding, she could have a proper wash, stop any more infection. Are you in pain? Martine called. No, just pissed off, Laura said. Just, you know. The next day, she chugged the bottle in one long gulp and curled up under a blanket to meditate it away. Laura was a big believer in positive imaging. She used to imagine every detail of the life she was working towards. The house, the kid, the husband, the car, the office, the wallet full of platinum credit cards, the white gold ring with the cushion-cut diamond. Now she imagined the water falling through her, collecting germs, little cartoon germs, like you used to see on adverts for cough mixture. Maybe if she stayed curled up, she'd be able to get properly warm. Maybe if she slept, she'd be able to fight it off. But Martine wouldn't let up. On and on and on about her podcast and the amazing things she knew if only she had remembered. As if it mattered what had brought them here. She was nearly grateful when Ivy started on about her training regime to get in shape for overpowering Kate. Laura had to admit there was sense in that. The inflatable chairs had given her a bad fright. They were delivered in flat packets, and it had taken a whole day to blow them up, taking it in turns. Laura was shocked at how little air her lungs seemed to have in them. They were gunked up with the foul air and the damp, but she knew it was lack of exercise too. Ivy was right. They had to get moving. But not today. She would start tomorrow, when she had thrown off this irritating little threat of infection. Nothing to worry about, just annoying. To take her mind off it, she decided she'd pipe up too, for once. Ivy had had her say about exercise, and Martine had given her podcast obsession an airing, so Laura deserved a turn. Even without sending a sign, she began. Then she sat up a bit to make her voice sound less wobbly. Someone might come at any time. Some copper's going to notice that my car headed west to here, and your car headed east to here. God, Ivy, if only you'd used a card to buy your ticket for the train. Some copper who's got a corkboard covered in string and thumbtacks, said Martine. In Brooklyn. Well, supposed to be Brooklyn, but it's filmed in Hollywood. Like that, you mean? Okay, not the police, Laura said. Vigilantes, people who don't care who's laughing. They'll never give up. We've no way of knowing who's looking for us, have we? No one said anything. My parents might be trying to get in touch. They live in Spain and we're not all over each other on a weekly basis, but you never know. I'm a bit sorry for once that my business is set up to tick over so smoothly. I won't have clients on the rampage. How about you, Martine? What about me? Who'll be heading up the search effort, fundraising, stapling posters to lampposts? For me, Martine said. Pass. My mum died years back, and my gran died not long ago too. My neighbours might be wondering. It's lovely to have good neighbours, said Ivy. My stair's not the sort of place people take an interest anymore. When I was young, when my dad was alive, we would all first foot up and down the whole street, and we'd run in and out with plates of cake and extra scones if we'd made too much. Mother was a great scone hand. Laura really did try to find something to say to that, but she was still casting about for it when Ivy went on. My cousins in Glasgow might be wondering. I usually write to them both on their birthdays, and I've missed the dates. Then there's all the people who saw me at the NLL meeting. With Kate. Everyone who saw us in the pub. No end of people, when I think about it. Laura could feel her eyes start to swim, and she turned her head away in case the other two could see the tears shining as they fell. When Kate brought the airbed and warm clothes and had her little blurt, and it finally shook the magic word out of Martine's memory, Laura felt better than she had for days. Her head was swimming and her eyes were gritty, but she danced around in her underwear while she was getting changed and made them both laugh. She wasn't cold either, even in her knickers and socks. She was toasty warm. She was hot, actually. Her cheeks were hot and her breath felt hot when she exhaled. She hadn't managed to pee away the infection after all. She'd just wasted 2 water rations and ended up thirsty in the night. It wasn't so sore anymore, though, or not in the same way. The nipping and burning had stopped, but there was an ache deep inside her, at the bottom of her back, she was trying not to think about. And she couldn't imagine helping Ivy jump on Kate and subdue her. She would have to let them do it without her. How long would Gail leave it before she came in, anyway? 10 minutes? Or would she go back upstairs? How long before she came down again? A day? Half a day? Then how long would it take with them both down here before... There it was! Laura sat up, making the chair squeal against the stone floor, making Martine go into her usual routine of shuddering and rubbing her arms as if she'd heard nails on a blackboard. "What is it?" Ivy said. "Tell me if I'm going mad," Laura said, "or if this makes sense." "Go on," said Martine. "We overpower Kate," Laura said, "and Gail comes in, then or later, to see if she's okay, right? And we overpower Gail, and then we wait until the neighbour that watches them notices they've disappeared." Martine said. "No," Laura said, "because when creepy Casper comes in to see what happened to the minion, she'll either have to leave the doors open or she'll have the key with her." There was a moment of complete silence. "No," said Martine, "you're not going mad. As soon as we get Gail inside both doors, we get out. We get out!" They sat stunned. Laura was still scared to look too closely at it in case it dried up and blew away. Ivy spoke first. "It can't be that easy. There must be something we haven't thought of." "Like what?" Martine said. Laura felt a surge inside her to hear Martine so fierce on her behalf. Gail wouldn't have left such an obvious way out," Ivy said, "after all the planning." "Yeah, but Ivy," Laura said, "her planning was all about getting us here, getting to know us, lurking on cat sites and genealogy sites and dating apps, setting us up to get here, sending Igor out to fetch us. She didn't have any plans for after, like we said." "Cats," Ivy said. "You're right. Kate was so sloppy when I got here. I said I was surprised she didn't have a cat. And it was like she forgot she should have. Like her auntie in Aberdeen, too." "And her brother-in-law," said Martine. "And don't forget Myra," Ivy said. They had had enough time now to pore over everything. Even the name of Ivy's friend who never turned up, the employee of fairytale endings, and the frequent contributor to Royal Blood who pushed Martine to go to the Lockerbie meetings. "And then there was the way she asked me to bring my laptop," Ivy went on, "but forgot to ask you to." Laura shook her head. She wished Ivy would stop gabbling. It was going through her head like a drill. Martine, laughing, was even worse. "She knew she didn't have to," she said. "She knew we'd never leave home without them. And if we had, Gail would just have gone back in and wiped them remotely." Ivy was silent a while. "You know, Kate sat there in the pub with me that first night and told me I shouldn't have let someone take over my keyboard. Did I tell you?" Martine nodded. "Same here," she said. "Asked me if I didn't worry that the tech support person would lurk in there forever. And all the time, Gail was doing just that to both of us." She glanced over at Laura. "All of us. Look," Laura said, "we all took the bait. We all ended up here. Let it go. What matters now is getting out again." Ivy's face was etched with pain. "It really is that simple to escape," she said. "Keep Kate till Gail comes, then walk out the door." She sobbed, a huge belch of misery. "I could have done that the first day I got here. What a moron! What a pathetic waste of space I am, sitting here for months in my own filth. Mother was right about me." "Shush, shush," Martine said. "Come on. We never thought of it when it was you and me either, did we? And I never thought of it even today. That was you, Laura." Laura stirred herself. "No, it wasn't. It took all three of us to get there. Martine worked out what Gail's doing, Ivy's the one who's tough enough to take Kate down, and I just worked out the last bit. The three of us did it together." "And I'm really glad you did work that bit out," Ivy said, "because you were wrong about the neighbour. There's no one to send a sign to." "What about the inflatable chairs?" "Same as the airbed. She's been careful not to give us anything we could use as a weapon. That's why they didn't carry kitchen chairs down for us. That's why we were on cardboard instead of camp beds." "When did you work all this out?" Martine said. "While you two were sleeping," Ivy said. "I was thinking of how I would tie her up and how there wasn't much to use." "Is there anything at all?" said Martine. "Yep," Ivy said. "I'm going to tie her up with the drain cover. I'd fight you both for the privilege. I want to hurt her. I'm glad it's an essential bit of the plan. I've never wanted to hurt anyone before." "And when will we do it?" said Martine. "If we're not stockpiling food, we don't need to wait. We could do it tomorrow." "We could," said Laura, "but I don't think I can do it tomorrow. I didn't want to worry you, but I'm actually not feeling all that fantastic." Ivy looked over. Then she stretched out her hand and laid it on Laura's head, gasping for some reason. "Oh, that feels good," Laura said. "Your skin's so cool. Don't take your hand away." Ivy swapped hands once Laura's hot skin had warmed the first one. Then Martine took over. By the time the cloth dipped in water was placed, she was unconscious. She only felt it in her dreams. 20. Nettie, it's grand to hear your voice. We didn't know where you'd gone, taking off like that. Siobhan sounded tired, and I could tell from the rumble in her throat that she was lying down, but she hadn't had to grope for the memory of who Nettie Dunn was, thankfully. "It's complicated," I said. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Are you in trouble?" Siobhan's stomach might be slowly killing her, but there was nothing wrong with her intuition. "Not me," I said. "I'm helping someone else. How are you?" "Kenneth's not been so clever. It's his knees. He's putting off having the first one done till it's more convenient. But it's getting tricky." I could see my reflection in the back window, and I shook my head at it. I was bugging someone whose poor old husband was hoping not to have his knee replaced till his wife was dead and didn't need him anymore. But never mind that. I'm glad you're okay. You were the best driver we ever had, you know. Never minded stopping off at the shops. This new one's a right stickler, and he can't park for shit. I gasp-laughed, choking myself. "Sorry," said Siobhan. "It's the pain. You wouldn't believe the pain. And if I take any stronger pills, I'll be off my pins, talking to the wallpaper. So my language has gone right downhill." "Oh, Siobhan," I said. "God, I'd forgotten what you were like. Come back and tell them all at the church when I'm gone. Them that sees me every day think I'm a bit of a misery guts lately." "Speaking of people you see every day," I said, "this is why I'm phoning, actually." "Oh?" "It's about your neighbour, Laura Wade," I began. Siobhan took it and ran before I could even get the question out. "You've never found her, have you? Is that who you're helping? Oh my God, wait till I tell Kenneth. He's popped out for a Swiftie, but he'll not be long. He was very fond of the girl, you know. She used to be out most days by the time the bin men came round, so Kenneth always took in her wheelie, and she was very grateful. Always rang the bell and said thanks, and then gave him a nice bottle of something at the year's end. She was a bit standoffish with me, a man's woman, I reckon. The way she dolled herself up any time she went over the door. I always thought she was hoping to meet Mr. Right. I haven't found her, no, I said, taking the chance while Siobhan drew breath. But you're looking. I hesitated. I wasn't looking. I wouldn't know where to start. I was just getting through this endless week, thinking about Laura Wade instead of about me. Trying to convince myself a woman couldn't just vanish, and Big Gary knew that, and so he wouldn't, would he? I'm just interested, I said to Siobhan. I think we saw her, you know. Oh, I know, all right, Siobhan said. The police were here time and again asking me. I'm surprised they never came after you to ask. I couldn't tell them much, only what time it was and what she was wearing. You'll have seen the photos in the paper, have you? See what I mean? All dolled up to the nines. But they didn't pursue it, I said. Not for long, anyway. Budgets, said Siobhan. Bloody politicians. I told them there was no way she would take off. She was young, but she was steady. You can tell from the shoes. Shoes? And bags. No cheap finery for Laura. She had one or two good bags, and she always wore driving shoes to save her high heels, serviced her car, packed away her winter clothes, shampooed her own carpets. How do you know what she did with her winter clothes? I said. Were you that close? She used to borrow our cylinder hoover to do her vacuum packs. She had an upright. I nodded. I was watching the little woman from the fairytale cottage again. It was a major clear-out today. She had been down to the cellar twice already with bulging black sacks. I couldn't imagine what was in them. They didn't weigh much, evidently, from the way she hefted them. Are you listening? Siobhan said. Yes. I said, no, sorry. What? I think she's been taken. Laura. I reckon whoever she was off to see in her pretty dress that day has got her locked up in an attic somewhere, like that mad woman in that thing, or those kids. You know how it is. I knew more than I'd ever wanted to by now. The numbers of missing, found dead, found alive, and never found. America got in the way when you Googled it, of course, and America was huge. There were prairies and deserts and thousands of miles of forests. If someone made a decent effort to hide a body in America, the chances were it would never be found. Scotland was different. Too many people and not enough wilderness. And where there was wilderness, there were hardly any roads crossing it. I laid all this out to Siobhan now. Plus, the roads cross sporting estates, I said, which means, I didn't know this, but I've been reading up. The gamekeepers take a note of all the number plates of cars they don't recognise. For poachers, you know. I was lying about reading up on it. My dad had told me when he was trying to put me off going to a rave in Deeside one time. I hadn't questioned how he knew. He was my dad. He knew things. But now I wondered if he'd had cause to learn which Scottish roads the gamekeepers watched and which ones were unguarded. And the soil's about an inch thick over solid rock most places. So, if the worst has happened, she'll turn up. Probably. Poor thing. She might be in the sea, Siobhan said, picked clean and her bones halfway to Finland. I tell you what, though, Nettie, it's a relief to get to talk to someone but Kenneth about it. He gets on at me for being morbid. I think it's him can't cope with talk of death, which, to be fair, I'll be gone, won't I? I'm not going to be looking into a coffin and trying not to toss my shreddies. Right enough, I said. Poor Kenneth. And anyway, Siobhan went on, being put in a shallow grave isn't the worst at all. Are you sure? I said. You need to read the papers. It's all over. I knew what she was going to say before she started, and maybe all the talk of graves and coffins had rattled me. I could feel my stomach start to churn. Sex slaves. I wondered what paper Siobhan read. I've been hearing that if we go back to a proper border, there won't be all these lorries coming through with 40 girls hidden in the back. I felt my blood drain. That was only once, I said, and they got caught. 40 folk in a lorry is usually people who want to come. They're coming to skin fish or gut chicken or pick cabbages, but willingly. The girls come on planes, Siobhan, one at a time. They think their pimps are their boyfriends. Rotten sods, Siobhan said. But they can't come through a hard border, is my point. So who's next to get nabbed? Stands to reason. Laura Wade. At least she can speak English, I said. If she gets away and finds a passer-by, at least she'll be able to say what's happened to her. Suppose, mind you, you'd have to be as thick as 2 planks not to know what's what, just because some girl's jabbering away in double Dutch, eh? No? I said nothing. I couldn't speak about it. I could hardly bear to think about it. I'd read the stats on the end users. In my world, the world of BG, with drivers doing long-distance runs away from home, I had to know dozens of them. I must have sat on their knees when I was a kid and joked around with them as a teenager. I had probably signed their leaving cards and given money when they were in hospital. I tried to hope they all went to world-weary single mums working out of their own council flats and socking away enough for Disneyland. But I wasn't a fool. Nettie, Siobhan said. Yeah, I said. I know, you can't wrap your head around it, can you? Not if you're half normal. And they say it's everywhere, right under our noses. Hiding in plain sight, I agreed. I've told Kenneth for after I'm gone. He's to get himself back to the choir and the whist club and snag himself a nice widow. There's no point in pretending he isn't what he is. They all are, but there's ways and ways of dealing with it. I was watching the little woman let herself back out of the cellar door again without her bulging bags of stuff. Maybe she was collecting jumble for a sale at the church. She looked churchy. Maybe I could go round with a bag of my own and strike up a passing friendship with another neighbour, someone else to talk to the cops. A woman of that age, living alone or even with a funny friend in a net curtain, was usually the sort to keep a close eye and take a keen interest. Mind you, if I set the stereotypes aside, I had to admit that this little woman kept her head down and scurried around like a wee mouse, more like someone who didn't want to be seen than someone who wanted to do the seeing. I was still thinking about that long after the end of the phone call, when I left the flat and went down to do a sweep of the gang who, even though they didn't know it, were building an expectation of my steadiness, ready to swear blind I'd never leave. For afterwards, if the worst happened. If he would. Wednesday already, Aisling said. She was dusting the basket of reduced-price nail polish on the counter, lining up the little bottles by shade once she'd wiped them. I've got a question, I said. We can do it with your knickers on if you insist, but we might miss some, Rennie said. Am I right? No, I said. And never in a million years, by the way. No. What it was I wondered if you know the people in the first house up the side street. The fairytale cottage, Aisling said. Nope. Bunch of weirdos. Yeah, said Rennie. Definitely Billy Goat's Gruff or Little Pigs, not Snow White or Cinderella. I don't know about Cinderella, though, Aisling said. Them at the post office reckon the parents always kept the girls on a right short rope. It's a shame, when you think about it. Yeah, but the parents are passed away now, said Rennie. Or in a home. For sure you don't see them, and the girls haven't exactly burst out and started pole dancing for fun and fitness. Why, anyway? Nothing, I said, when I realised she was asking me. I was thinking weirdos weren't the ones to watch. It was normal that was dangerous, under our noses, everywhere. Can I ask something else? They waited. Speaking of short ropes, you ever had girls come in? I paused, not sure how to word it. Groups of them, together. Hen nights? Aisling said. Not enough. Why? Are you thinking of having one? We gave one as a prize for the foster home fund at Christmas, said Rennie. Some bint into her book club won it. It wasn't exactly a riot. I like a hen night with a bit of, crying on the stairs, puking in your handbag, I said. Exactly. But speaking of the foster home, I said, trying again. Or, not really, I suppose, because it's after they leave, really. When they get to London and step off the bus. What is? Rennie said. I was just thinking, something I saw on the news. If a guy brought in a load of girls to get fancy nails and likes of Nicholas waxing, would you find that strange? Both girls stopped what they were doing and turned to face me. Trafficked girls, you mean? Rennie said. Her greened and contoured face couldn't change colour, but it fell. My stomach lurched and I nodded dumbly. We went to a talk about it, Aisling added. They went round the country, Police Scotland I think it was, or it might have been some government lot, but we both went. They'd never get them out again if they brought them in here, would they, Wren? So you know what to look out for, I said. Not knowing the date, not knowing how long they're here for, not knowing the name of the town they're in, not knowing the name of the person they're staying with, pretending not to understand even when they do, not having their own money or a phone, not having a handbag. Yeah, we know. They knew more than me, I thought. So, it's probably daft to say this, but if anyone tried to get one of you to meet him somewhere quiet, you wouldn't go, would you? Us? Said Rennie. Ash and me. Come on. We're the Rohypnol generation. We've been at DEF CON 1 since our trainer bras. Right, I said. Right, course you have. Are you on a case? Said Aisling. Are you, undercover investigating something? No, I said. Not exactly. I mean, it's probably best if I didn't talk about it. In the hall, said Rennie. My flat, I said. I had lain awake for hours last night, couldn't get the thought out of my head. You know it's Airbnb, right? Have you ever seen folks staying there that made you worry? Seriously, said Rennie. In the hall, upstairs from us. I'm just asking. Aye, right you are, said Aisling. No, it's mostly scientists, mostly biologists. They're looking at stuff growing on the shale bings, some big project. They'll be spitting tacks you've nipped in. They'll have to stay at the Paraffin Arms, said Rennie, and it's not as posh as it sounds. She took a breath and shared a look with her sister. Is there? She said. Something going on? I really can't talk about it, I said. But if I go away suddenly, don't let anyone tell you I meant to, eh? Wow! They spoke in chorus, and I left them standing, owl-eyed, gazing after me. A deem, I said, putting my Scotsman on the counter and a packet of sugar-free gum on top of it. Do you ever get anyone in here you're worried about? Customers that set off your alarm bells? Like you are now, you mean? What you on about? Stop it. I'm serious. I mean, customers you worry about, in case they're not okay. All the bloody time, Adeem said. He had been keying open crisp boxes, but he let his keyring snap back to his belt on its spiral cord and rested his arms on the top of the box in front of him. I worry about that pair above the pub, going home legless, up those steep stairs at their age. And I worry they're going to put a chip pan on and burn us all to the ground. They usually have a carry-out when they're sploshed, I said. Sorry, but they never shut their curtain, and I live alone. And that's another thing, he said. You live alone. Fair enough. You're young and strong. It's the old ones that worry me. All on their own, with a nurse coming in the morning and meals on wheels. I'll never understand that about you lot. Us lot? I mean, don't get me wrong. It drives me insane, having my mum sitting there in the corner. My wife never gets a minute's peace from the old dear, and it's only 3 years since her mum finally popped her clogs, but We know when it's us, it'll be just the same, sitting in the corner of our daughter-in-law's living room, driving her up the wall. Not parked in a home somewhere, wishing for visitors, like you lot. Right, I said, like us lot. Like the parents of the sisters at the fairytale cottage, Aisling and Rennie said, tidied away. You're dead right, you know. I know. But it wasn't old people I was thinking of. I stopped and considered Adim, his open face looking back at me, his arms crossed on the top of the crisp box, sleeves rolled up, good watch loose on his skinny wrist, nails short and dirty from grubbing around with cash and cardboard all day. Why was I hesitating? I took a deep breath. It was girls I was thinking of. Mind you, I don't suppose they'd be trolling about buying papers. Girls, Adim said. You mean like Eastern European girls? Exactly. I've been reading about it, and it's everywhere, I know. I've never seen anything round this way, but there was a government roadshow came through, and they wouldn't have stopped here if it wasn't worthwhile, would they? I shrugged. My cousin said something once. He frowned, remembering. There was this guy, a right lowlife, nothing you could pin it on, but just a bad vibe. You know what I mean? Of course you do. This was Penny Cook, and one of his kids had been at school with the bloke, knew him. Said he lived on his own in his dead mum's house, 3 bedrooms, end of terrace, but he definitely lived alone. Only he was in and out of my cousin's shop and he bought magazines. Cosmo, Hello, 17, Shout. Adim swallowed hard. He bought Jackie Wilson. And Sweeties. What did he do? Your cousin, I mean. Called the cops on a tip line. Never found out what happened, but he never saw the guy again. We all watched the papers, but there was never anything reported on it. He had been staring at the counter, lost in his memories. Now he looked up. Is that why you're here? Is that what you're doing? I felt myself flush. What was I doing? Trying to save my family business instead of phoning a tip line and letting it sink. The Hollywood girls, Adim and his cousin, even Siobhan, thought more about the girls, those endless, nameless, faceless girls, than I had until this year, when I was already too late to save them. It's all right, Adim said. If you can't say, you can't say. I gave him a serious look. He meant it. He knew men like Big Gary were real, and I wasn't crazy to be scared, to be hiding. Briefly, he put his hand over mine and squeezed it. You know where I am if you need me. I wanted to tell him everything, right there and then. Not him, really, not Adim, just someone. I'd been on my own with this far too long. Instead of going straight home, I wandered up the side street and in at the gate of the fairytale cottage, scuffing my feet in the browned apple blossom on the path. I knocked hard on the front door and waited. No one answered, so I turned and walked away. I was filling my kettle when I saw the little woman coming out into her garden again with yet another bundle of something to store in the cellar, and I tried not to be annoyed that I'd been left standing on the step. If a person doesn't want to answer her door, she doesn't have to. She wasn't elderly, not frail, and hadn't they all just decided, Adim and the girls and me myself, that it was young women who needed someone to watch them and worry, not nice wee wifies in cardies like her down there. 21. I don't know if she can hear us, Martine whispered. Is she sleeping or unconscious? She's so hot, but she's not sweating. Her skin feels dry. Shh. Laura thought she said it out loud. She might be able to hear everything, Ivy said. We should talk to her. Laura, Martine said gently. It might hurt when we move you, but we want you out of harm's way. Please don't hurt me, Laura screamed it. It hurts so much anyway. I don't think she can hear us, Martine said. Ivy, do you throw your medicine out like you're supposed to? You know how you're supposed to. Everyone says they do, like flossing your teeth, but do you? I've still got some of Mother's, Ivy said. It's not like the old days, big brown bottles of castor oil. Those pills are inert, and you can Google them. It would be a waste to chuck them out. Time it takes you to get an appointment at the clinic sometimes. That's what I thought, said Martine. Kate's bound to have a decent stash up there, isn't she? Antibiotics. They both looked at Laura for a while, watching her breathing. Did you really take castor oil? I thought that was for your scalp. It's a laxative, Ivy said. Mother. Say it. Shh. Laura wished neither of them would say anything. Okay, I'll go first, Martine said. You said we should talk to her. Here goes. Laura, my mother was a selfish, clueless mess. She did her best, but it wasn't nearly good enough. She was always about the new boyfriend, the one that was going to sweep her off her feet and take her away from it all. Laura, if you can hear me, it hurts my heart that you're just the same. You're clever and funny and pretty. Why are you just the same? It's only natural to want to be loved, Ivy said. I loved her, said Martine. Then she bit her lip, shocked at how loud she'd spoken. For a while she sat in silence, watching Laura breathe. Ivy was doing her circuits, she noticed after a while, trotting round and round with her arms pumping. I really did love her, she said. But she was absolutely bloody hopeless, Ivy. You've no idea. The place stank like bin juice all the time, and we had ants in the cupboards because she'd never put anything in containers. It was just a big pile of packets with ants rummaging around inside them, so then she'd buy a new packet and shove the old one to the back. But I did love her. She tried once to make it better, Martine remembered. God knows where she got the money, but she decorated the bathroom. She stripped off the old mouldy paper and washed the walls with a bottle of sugar soap from the ironmonger. She painted them pale pink and got matching pink curtains that crossed over and tied in bows. She carried an offcut of pink carpet home over her shoulder, singing, and cut it to fit with kitchen scissors, added a fluffy bath mat and seat cover. There were candles. It took less than a week for the black mould to shine through the new paint, Martine said, and the carpet curled up in the damp. God, Ivy. The look on her face when she rolled it up again and stuffed it in the wheelie. Your poor mum, Ivy said, panting a bit. And poor Laura, too. That's not much of a bedside story. It's got a happy ending, Martine said. She went out and got legless, and it's a lot easier to clean wine sick off bare floor than damp carpet. Oh, sweetheart, said Ivy. She was back beside Martine and Laura now, and she sat, letting herself drop into the squealing, inflatable chair. How old were you? Don't worry, Martine said. I wasn't a kid. I was at high school. The thing is, Ivy said, then she drifted off. She did that a lot. She would start talking, then disappear inside her own head, deep into her own memories, completely forget that there was someone waiting to hear whatever it was she wanted to say. Sometimes Martine poked her to keep talking, but today she let her drift. Laura sank into the piece and drifted too. The thing is, Ivy said again, typical. Laura needed the silence, and so of course Ivy was back. I can see it from both sides, she was saying. I've been the one who was hopeless and disappointing, and I've been the one who was disappointed and stopped hoping. My mum didn't feed me or wash my clothes, and I had to teach myself how to do my hair from an article in a magazine, Martine said. I bet that's not what you mean. I don't want to go over it all again, Ivy said. She's gone where she can't hurt me. Oh, you mean how was I hopeless? How did I disappoint her? I was always fat, clumsy, bad skin, couldn't sing, shy. No good at tennis. My teeth were yellow. I was hard on my shoes. You were what? Said Martine. I was hard on my shoes, Ivy said. They had to get resoled a lot. Your mother blamed you for gravity. Ivy was silent for a moment, then started laughing. She did. That's right, she did. Oh, Martine, I'm going to say it. I really am going to say it. She took a huge breath. I'm so glad she's dead, and I never thought I'd be able to tell anyone. Whatever happens to us. She broke off, and they both looked over at Laura again, watching her chest lift and drop. I'll never be sorry I met you. And I'm going to tell you something else now. She paused and took a few more breaths to calm down. I've only ever wanted someone to love me. Someone to care about me. I wanted to come first with someone. I never had that, and I always thought it sounded lovely. I had that with my gran. It is lovely. I'm sorry you missed it. I don't mind, Ivy said. She was determined to have her say this time. She wouldn't be shouted down. It mattered. I really don't. See, I was still thinking like a child. 54, and I was still a child. I wanted someone to love me and care about me. I was ready to settle for a cat, and instead I got you, and then Laura. And I'm so much older than you. You never understood what I was getting at when I said that. You shouted me down. Still don't. Still would. The thing is, it doesn't matter which way it goes, in or out, loved or loving. It feels the same. Actually, I think it feels better to love because you're in charge of it never stopping. Now, do you understand? Laura could feel tears welling up and spilling down the sides of her face. Oh my God, said Martine. Look, she can hear us. She's conscious. Ivy, she must be in so much pain. All the more reason to stick to the plan, Ivy said. We get Laura safely out of the way. I take the drain cover and go behind the door. When Kate comes in, I whack her with it. Okay? What do I do? Stay safely tucked away, Ivy said. Precious girl. When Martine knew she could talk again without her voice breaking, she said, Can I ask her about antibiotics first, though? Ask her today, and tomorrow we'll do it, unless Gail comes down to choose. But either way we'll do it. I'll do it for you, for both of you. And you do something for me, all right? You let me. What's wrong with her? Kate's nose was wrinkled and her voice sounded guttural, as if she was so disgusted by them she might gag. You'd smell just as bad if someone kept you down here for weeks on end, Martine thought. A kidney infection, Ivy said. She had a bladder infection and now it's gone up into her kidneys. She's got a high temperature, very high. I wouldn't be surprised if she starts having seizures. Renal failure, Kate said. Martine felt a slow roll of utter revulsion go through her. The woman sounded excited. There was no other word for it. So, what we thought, she said, was maybe you could bring down a flask of warm water for her to drink, and maybe if you had any antibiotics lying around in your medicine cabinet. Anything would do. Are you prone to it yourself? It would be great if you had just the right thing, obviously. Kidney chills, said Kate. No, we're not. What a thing to say to a person. Martine blinked at her. That's a nasty, dirty thing to let yourself get, Kate said. Honeymoon disease, they used to call it. Gail and I have never been in the way of anything like that. With one last glare, she turned to Laura and leaned forward. Martine remembered her leaning over Gail, spilling stovies on the floor, and had to look away. Oh, Kate was saying, I can feel the heat coming off her. I've got to report this to Gail right now. She'll be very interested in this. So if you could bring down what you've got, we could see if anything helps her, Martine said. Kate straightened and turned. I'll ask, she said. "But I don't think so. I don't think Gail would want me interfering." When she had left, Ivy and Martine went through the carrier bag of food. "Sandwiches, apples and water," Martine said. "I'm not hungry. She's taken my appetite away." What did she mean? "By interfering," Ivy said. "I don't know. And it doesn't matter whether or not you're hungry. You need to eat so you can run without fainting. I'm going to see if Laura will take some sips of water. You choose an apple. It's your go." Martine ate an apple, then a sandwich. So did Ivy. Laura swallowed some water, coughed some back out again, and fell into a deeper sleep than ever. The next day, Ivy and Martine shared the third sandwich. They saved the third apple. That night, as they were settling down to sleep, Ivy beside Laura, feeling the heat of her fever, they finally admitted the truth to themselves and each other. "Interfering with Laura being so ill," Ivy said. "Interfering with Laura dying," said Martine. "That was our last chance, and I wasted it, begging for help. We should have—" "Too late now," Ivy said. "You weren't to know." Ivy, Martine said. "What are we going to do?" "Shush, shush, shush," Ivy said. "Let me think." "Leave it to me. I'll think of something, I promise you." Martine burrowed into her like a nursing kitten. She didn't seem to mind the rank onions stink of her, just as bad as ever now after the new clothes had given them a fresh start. How many days ago was that now? Ivy stayed awake until Martine was snoring, then she let herself sleep too, and was woken by the key in the lock. It was the dead of night, black as ink, and not a single swish of distant traffic on the road. "Marty," she breathed, and felt Martine stiffen as she woke too. But no one came in. Not Gail finally making her move, not Kate out of her routine. Instead, they heard a rattling sound, fast, then slow as it got near them, and the door locking again. "What was that?" Martine whispered. "I think," said Ivy, wriggling out from between the two girls. "At least I hope it was a bottle of pills. Help me find it, eh?" Holding it 5 minutes later when they'd traced its trajectory over the lumpy floor to where it had stopped, Ivy shook it. "Sounds quite full." "But of what, though?" Martine said. "It could be diuretics. It could be to finish her up. Make her worse." "It could be," Ivy said. "If we wait till daylight, maybe we could read the label. If it's even the right pills inside." "But think about it," said Ivy. "If it's a trick, why didn't she bring them in the daytime? Maybe she waited till night so Gail didn't find out." "But it's Gail's time," said Martine. "The middle of the night. So it's a trick." They were silent for a while, listening to Laura's ragged breathing. "What choice have we got?" Ivy said at last. "If we crush some up in her water and she—" "I can't say it." "We'll never know anyway. If we don't, we'll never know. If it's good stuff to help her, she might get better, and she might not. The only thing we do know is urine goes to kidney, goes to sepsis, goes to— What choice have we got?" In reply, Martine took the bottle out of Ivy's hands, shook a couple of pills into the lid and ground her knuckle down into them, wincing. "Don't hurt yourself," Ivy said. "We could use—" But there was nothing. An old stiletto heel, the corner of a drain cover. "Here, give me a turn too." Then they waited, round and round, convinced she was better, convinced she was worse, thirsty, scared for themselves, starting to feel the hunger bite too. Laura was going to die, Ivy thought, and they would never know if they'd killed her. Then what? Would her body be left down there? Could Martine bear it? Could Ivy comfort her enough to take that horror away? "I've got it," she said. Sitting up so abruptly, Martine slid sideways. She'd been so relaxed, curled up at Ivy's side. I hope Laura's completely out, because otherwise this is going to be awful. But I've thought of a way to get the Kate in here and restart the plan." She gave Martine one last squeeze, then wriggled away and stood up, pacing as she laid it out. "We're going to pretend Laura's dead." Martine was looking at Laura and didn't see so much as a twitch. If she had, she'd never have agreed to it. "Now, I know this house is solid," Ivy was saying, "but if we wail and scream at the top of our lungs, they'll hear something, don't you think? They'll hear the tune, if not the words. Can you make mourning sounds? Can you kneel at her side, hold her hand, and cry?" "Of course," Martine said. She stroked Laura's cheek. "I really hope she's completely out, or this is going to be a nightmare." It took them a long while to gird themselves for it. Even so, they talked on and on and on, and they rested, as much as they could bear to, with the plan surging in their veins, making their muscles shiver like horses' flanks when flies land. They even took some sips of water, even though for days they'd been giving most of it to Laura, thinking the extra sedation would help with her pain, watching her swallow weakly, spluttering. She was peaceful as they rolled her onto one side, then the other, pulling the filthy blanket out from under her. They took it over to the drain and spread it for her to lie on. Then, trying not to let their hearts sink at how weak they felt, and being as gentle as they could be, they slid Laura over the floor and arranged her on it, folding it over her, covering her from top to toe. Oh God, Martine muttered. I know, said Ivy, stroking her back. Then she slid the drain cover clear, gagging deep in her throat at the stink. Staggering a little, she hefted it up and put it under her arm, then stepped away from the other two and gave it a couple of swings. Okay, Martine said. Fine, said Ivy grimly. There's a kind of ridge I can get my fingers under. I won't let it go, and it's good and heavy. One swipe, as long as I do it right. And then we wait for Gale. And then we're out. Martine gave Ivy a long, steady look, then put her head back and, starting low in her throat, she began to wail. No! No! Laura! Come back! Don't die! No! Ivy crept over to crouch behind the inner door and send her own bellowing roars of grief up to the stone ceiling. It seemed like hours until the sound of the key, but it couldn't have been. Martine couldn't have howled for hours without losing her voice. Ivy stood up, knees bent and arms raised, the good honest weight of the drain cover giving her strength rather than taxing her. When the inner door opened, she steadied her feet and got ready. Kate was shouting before she was in the room. Is she dead? Is she dead? She was swinging a torch around, the unfamiliar light skirling over the dank stone, making it sparkle. Martine stopped crying, struck dumb, Ivy thought, by the tone of the words, simmering close to hysteria. Kate stopped, the torch full in Martine's face, her mouth open and her eyes wet. Is she dead? Then she shrieked, like an animal. Get away from there! Get away from there! Martine, helpless not to, flicked a glance at Ivy. Kate spun round on her heel, sending the torchlight wheeling again, saw Ivy standing there, arms over her head, but then, unbelievably, turned back and went charging to where Martine was crouched at Laura's side, began beating her over her back and her head with the torch. How dare you! How dare you! That's mine! That's private! Ivy, the plan forgotten, went rushing up to help, dropping the drain cover, reaching Kate and grabbing for the sickening zigzag arc of light, trying to catch the torch as it came down again and again on Martine's back. Then strong hands were pulling her back and sending her sprawling on the floor, her elbow cracking hard and an instant rose of pain blooming. Gale loomed over her, jabbing at her with her blade, pressing Ivy back and back and back. They were going to die. Martine bludgeoned to death and kicked into that stinking hole. Ivy stabbed. Laura, if she wasn't gone already, soon to sink into the blackness. "I'm sorry," Ivy whispered, as her bowel and her bladder and the last of her hope all let go.